Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Sosha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in.
Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Sosha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. On each episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This episode, we are broadcasting live from Sydney in Australia at the Legal Innovation and Tech Fest 2023. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. My guest for this episode is Phil Smith. Phil is head of eDiscovery APAC at Ashurst Advanced of Ashurst. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, George. Thank you.
I would like to start, as I so often do, by asking you a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you got into this whole world of eDiscovery and what you do today.
Well, I have a very unique story in that I fell into eDiscovery unnecessarily.
Unlike
anybody else, yeah. So I actually started off supporting what it was back then, Ringtail. So I'm much more from a technology background, although studying economics at university. And then I became a solutions architect, which is the greatest job for a sort of 20-something young single man traveling around the world, installing enterprise software in various parts, including failing to install it in Turkey, of all places. But then transitioned from that, and I spent about 6 or 7 years in London and really cut my teeth on, as it was back then, the LIBOR and FX investigations work. Which were truly global, learned from some amazing people from my previous employer at FTI, and then transitioned back to Australia, found myself an English wife, and then managed to convince her to come back to Australia. And
you're still here.
And we're still here.
Okay.
5 or 6 years later, and we're still here, and still utilizing a lot of that experience from those large sort of global regulatory matters we learned from back then, and implementing that into the Australian market.
Well, you have seen over time, I'm sure, a big change in what eDiscovery looks like inside a law firm.
Yeah, so having spent, I guess, the majority of my time in the consulting world, I learned that being at the cutting edge of the technology is sort of one piece of the puzzle. It's that how do you work hand in glove with the legal team, the technology experts, and it's interesting over the years we've seen a change, but also in jurisdictions we saw a change compared to the UK, US model, and Australia. We're very unique in that law firms do a lot of this type of work in-house. So over those years we saw the technology dramatically change. It was a really big thing to have a web-based review tool when I first started.
It was.
And it was groundbreaking. It had tabs. It was revolutionary back then. And then seeing the transition from early adoption of AI for the review perspective, and now what we're seeing now, which is the not only the proliferation of data, but it's all these new data types that are causing everyone lots of lovely headaches in our world of investigation and regulatory and disputes work.
But part of what you mentioned there is a difference in models between, say, the UK and the US and Australia in terms of who does what. Talk more about that.
And I'm not going to say which one's better. I'm not going to get into that argument. They're just different. Let's put it that way.
Some different is better than others.
Some different is better than others, and it's not the model, it's the people, and there's a whole backstory behind that.
So tell us about your difference.
So
whether it's better or not.
Yeah. So my different, I see this a lot with my colleague Maxim in the UK. where it's very much an outsourced model. They rely heavily on their service providers to provide to stay up to date with the technology, to be able to scale. I think is really important. That's why a comfort level that they get is the ability that they can give them the smallest matters, but they also the really large behemoth ones of millions and millions and millions of documents, and they can manage that for them. And we see a lot of that sort of global partnership that plays out in the UK and the US, where there is a global one, particularly with the end client. In Australia, it's slightly different. The law firms and the larger law firms tend to do a lot of the e-discovery work in-house, and that's end-to-end. So that might be, I'll say, light touch collections, not the forensic collections, processing right through to workflow, document review, production. A lot of the major law firms sort of do that work in-house. And it creates a really sort of symbiotic process with the legal team, that it's matter after matter working with the same teams, developing really solid workflows, repeatable processes that I think then allow us to scale immensely. So it's not really that concern.
Why do you think it developed differently in Australia than, say, the United States?
That's a good point. So it may be there's a lot of origins of e-discovery tools in Australia. Ringtail was developed in the four walls of Ashurst, as it used to be Blake Dawson then. So that history has been long-standing, I think. Also, it's a willingness to take chances or develop or try new things and invest in technology. The risk aversion, but I think it really goes back to that sort of long-standing sort of 15 years ago. There's some people that have, and there's lots of people in other parts of the world that have got a long history, but a lot of them are now started off in the law firms, and there's people from KWM that have been in the industry for 20 years. My predecessor, Emma Forbes, 35 years in e-discovery. So I think that long history is probably a big part of that.
I have a theory.
Yeah,
which could be totally half-baked, but it goes.
It's going to be better than mine.
It goes back to a month that my wife, our kids, and I spent in Australia in 2007.
Okay. Yep.
We got to see large parts of the country. We never got out to Perth, unfortunately.
Yep.
But we learned about, and I forget the exact name of the two programs, the Flying Doctors, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And the School of the Air, where the school is broadcast over the radio.
Yes, the remote working sort of, yeah.
Well, for education in particular.
Yeah, okay.
Because it's like hundreds of miles.
Yeah.
From one
and you can't just jump on a bus and go down to school,
And the impression for us was that was all part of a deeply ingrained and developed cultural sense of the need for independence and self-sufficiency, because you're so far apart. Or you're on opposite sides of a continent with not a whole lot of
we're quite isolated way down here in the bottom.
It feels to me that, and this is again my half-baked theory, that experience with how this continent has developed has an impact on how you all approach things like you discovered there too. That's true. Unique need for self-sufficiency.
And we do things a little differently as a process, not just who does the work, but the actual production side of things is very different. The old battle between a PDF and a native is fought, in every legal tech conference in Australia. And I think we may see a change of that because the world's a lot smaller and we're adopting various processes. But it's true, and it's like for many way back when, Australia used to be a leader in telecommunications because we were so big, and we had to be. We've fallen behind in recent years, but that was a driving force for that because we had to figure out a way to deal with this large expanse of land.
Right. Yeah. So that's my theory.
I think that sounds good. That's better than a well, it's just what we've always done, which is always my worst theory. I hate that. Yeah.
But wherever it came from, what it's meant is that the firms, especially the larger ones, but maybe large and small, you tell me, are much more self-sufficient, I take it, in how they approach e-discovery.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the key people at each of these large firms, we've all been in the industry sort of 16, 20 years. So some of us, like myself, have cut our teeth in consulting firms and then moved in-house into law firms.
Yep.
Most of our team are from ex-consulting firm bases. So it's learning kind of that, I guess, that agility that consulting firms have to work with,
Right.
but then bring